Hey, what's been good about your day? It's Marty Newport. Time for story time. I'm going to continue on with Heaven Changes Everything by Todd and Sonja Burpo. We are on chapter 31 called The Coach's Challenge. The Coach's Challenge. So it says, I remember seeing my mother in anguish at the funeral, but her grief didn't end there. As I got older, I'd sometimes catch her in prayer with tears gently sliding down her cheeks. When I asked her what's wrong, she would share with me, I'm worried about whether Pop went to heaven. Do you remember that name, Pop? Let's see. Todd says, I'm a small town guy, and that means I wear a lot of different hats. It's what small town people do. I'm a pastor and a businessman. I still work for the garage door company I used to own. I'm also a volunteer firefighter, and I still love to coach wrestling. Sometimes I switch hats so many times during the day, it's hard to keep track of which times during the day. I switch hats so many times during the day, it's hard to keep track of which one I'm wearing at any particular time. They all blend together. Those of you who live in rural America know that's how small towns work. It might seem strange to city people, but to small town folk, this lifestyle is normal. Right now I'm wearing my coach's hat. So this message is primarily for the men who may be reading this book. Women, it's okay if you read what I say here. It's possible it might apply to you too. But in my experience, this message needs to be heard by men. Pop, my maternal grandfather, was a good, hard-working man. He went to church every now and then, and he talked about the typical things men discuss in those days. Growing up, I knew he'd be at a donut shop most mornings to meet his buddies and talk about whatever was going on in the town or on the farm, like crops, the weather, someone's new truck, things like that. But he never brought up his faith, at least not to my mom. Never talked about spiritual things. So when he died, he left my mom, his daughter, wondering. And not just musing idly about his eternal destination, but worrying and fretting so sorrowfully that it impacted her life for years after he died. All unnecessarily. Some of you men reading this are all too much like Pop. I'm not questioning if you love your families or not. I'd just like to ask you, how much? Here's how things could have been for my mom as she grieved for her dad. I recently buried a friend named Wilfred. It's always hard to preach a friend's funeral, but Wilfred's funeral was the opposite of how Pop's funeral unfolded all those years ago. Like Pop, Wilfred was a good, hard-working man, fiercely loyal to his family, and a good provider. A few months ago, Wilfred had to undergo open heart surgery. Before the operation, he pulled me aside to talk, and he said, Todd, I want you to know this. I've told my kids and my wife that everything is okay between me and God. Wilfred was a member of my congregation and many times had heard me give this same challenge I'm sharing with you now. Wilfred made it through the surgery, and we began to pray hard for his recovery. In the next chapter, we will share how our son Colby prayed for Wilfred. For 60 days, we thought God was answering our prayers, and we expected Wilfred would be back among us, resuming his busy life. But then he died. And as a pastor, I was called upon to preach his funeral. Was the funeral sad? Yes, everyone cried, including the pastor preaching the sermon. Do we miss Wilfred? Yes, every day. But while we mourn our loss because we can't help but miss this friend who meant so much to us, nobody has to ask where Wilfred is. We all know. Most importantly, his family knows because he had told them. Wilfred's funeral was what Christian funerals are supposed to be, a celebration of a life well lived. Yes, and also a time for loved ones to mourn, but that funeral was completely different from Pop's and so many others, because each of Wilfred's immediate family members had been told by Wilfred, not their pastor, that Wilfred was square with God. He had been forgiven, he'd given his life to Jesus, and things were good between Wilfred and God. I didn't have to reassure anybody. Wilfred had already done it. He had manned up. He had that discussion with his family, and as a result, they were unwavering assurance and confidence about where he was spending eternity. It was the best gift Wilfred could give his family, one that I, as pastor, never could have given them. Men, if you ask your wives if they'd like you to talk with them about your faith, what do you think they would say? And if the shoe is on the other foot, then women, consider this question directed at you with regard to your husband. If you're hesitant to ask, then let me be her voice for a minute. Let me speak for your kids and your grandkids and your closest friends. Yes, they would love for you to tell them you're square with God and that you have accepted Jesus as your Lord. Believe me, it's a lot more reassuring coming from you now than when it comes at your funeral from some pastor who may or may not know you. They need to hear it from you. My mom needed to hear it from her dad, but Pop didn't tell her. In his defense, a reasonable man would have thought he had time. Pop didn't know he was going to be killed in an accident 2 days after he made that decision. So the years passed and my mom wondered and worried whether she would see her dad again in heaven. Only when Colton came back from heaven and told us he'd met Pop there did we know for sure. Then we learned from a relative that Pop had attended a special service in a little country church just 2 days before he died and had quietly raised his hand when the preacher asked at the end of the sermon if anyone wanted to give his life to Christ. Because he didn't tell his family, Pop left his family, including his daughter, my mom, wondering if she would ever see her dad again. So she spent 28 long years not knowing about her father's decision that night. What a difference Pop could have made coming home from that little church, gathering his family around and happily saying, "I want to tell you something." What comfort he would have given them. Let me tell you, peace at a funeral is a precious thing. And let me tell you something else that I've learned from firsthand experience. The deceased person can give his or her family way more peace than any pastor ever can. Men are taught to take care of their families, to buy life insurance and make other financial arrangements so their loved ones will be okay if the husband or dad dies first. But something much more important than life insurance is the confidence of knowing you're right with God. Man up. Tell them, give them that gift. And if you haven't asked God for forgiveness and accepted Jesus into your heart, take care of that now. Now would be a good time. And then have the talk with your family. It's not your pastor's job to give your family peace at your funeral. It's yours. So man up. Take care of that responsibility right now. The jailer called for lights, rushed in and fell trembling before Paul and Silas, and then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord and him to all the others in his house. And at that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household. That's from Acts 16:29 through 34. Let's go into chapter 32 called Contagious Faith. When in the spring of 2004, the most brilliant rainbow we'd ever seen appeared over Imperial, we called him outside to take a look. Colton was down the hall in the playroom. "Hey, Colton," I called. "Come out and take a look at this." He emerged from the playroom and joined us at the front stoop. "Look at that rainbow, Colton," Sonja said. "There's definitely should be a big pot of gold at the end of that thing." Colton squinted, peered up at colors pouring across the sky. "Cool," he said with a nonchalant smile. "I prayed for that yesterday." Then he turned on his heel and went back to play. Sonja says when Colton prayed for a rainbow and wasn't at all surprised when one appeared the next day in spectacular fashion, his siblings and his parents were watching and learning. Now, Colton's little brother Colby fully expects his specific prayers to be answered too. Obviously, Colton's attitude has rubbed off on his little brother and a lot of other people too. Colby is a typical little brother, and Colton and Cassie, fiercely loyal one minute and an annoying pest the next. It's normal in our house to hear Colton and Colby arguing over some injustice one of them committed, at least in the other brother's eyes. Usually it's that one of them that has borrowed the other one something or other without asking. But despite their occasional spats and the differences in their ages and personalities, one of the things that's become most apparent to us as Colby gets older is that he has caught his brother's childlike faith. What we saw happening in Colby, we wanted to see happen in other kids as well. We asked ourselves, what if other kids, not only Colby, could catch Colton's simple childlike faith? That's how the children's book Heaven is for Real came about. We started writing it. Our goal was that children would learn that Colton already understands and that he could catch, or that they could catch this contagious faith and then pass it on. We worked hard to put Colton's experience into a story that was appealing and understandable to children. The book was published and we began hearing from many families that it had become a favorite with their kids. But nothing prepared us for a video the Thudeman family sent us of their 7-year-old son Graham reading Heaven is for Real to his church congregation, something he had asked to do. Actually, Graham's dad said Graham had memorized the book, so we don't even know if he was actually reading the words as the pages were turned or reciting it from memory. Graham was in the end stages of his battle against an inoperable brain tumor, so his speech was distorted. His dad repeated each line after Graham said it first. It seems impossible that anyone would watch the video without tears or without being fully convinced that Graham caught Colton's faith and was eager to pass it on. I can't imagine anyone watching the YouTube video without tears and without being inspired about the truth that heaven is for real. Graham's faith is contagious too. 2 days after Todd watched this video, he contacted Graham's family only to learn that Graham had entered heaven just moments earlier. Todd wept with his dad at the loss of their child, but at the same time, we're all comforted that Graham and his family faced Graham's death, knowing exactly where he would be the moment he sighed out his last breath. And we rejoice to imagine that day when Graham's parents will see their boy again in heaven, healthy, whole, and cancer-free. We plan to see him there too. A kid's faith is contagious, not only to kids. Not only do kids catch the gift of personal faith from each other, including their siblings, they also spread it to the adults who are fortunate enough to hear them. Don't ever forget, some contagious things like faith are worth catching. This chapter ends with Galatians 3:26. In Christ, you are all children of God through faith. We'll read some more tomorrow. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye.